So in my time of collecting watches, I've gotten many things right, but I've also gotten many things wrong. And in this video, we're gonna be looking at some of those in the wrong ideas, looking at mistakes that watch collectors should avoid at all costs. So in the past, I've looked at watch collecting mistakes, how you acquire new watches, what are some of the shortcomings that might come on new collectors, but that is not what I'm speaking about here. More the day-to-day of owning a watch, what are some of the mistakes commonly you will make if you're not aware of some of these. I have no doubt made many of these mistakes, so I'm gonna be speaking from personal experience in many of the instances here. Now for point number one, I'm gonna be speaking about something that is actually top of mind for me right now. I was just thinking about this, and it was one of the main motivations for making this video: clasp alignment on bracelets. You might be thinking, what does this even mean? When people look to size their bracelet for the first time, mostly you're thinking about the circumference of your wrist and how many lengths should you take out, which is absolutely true. And if you go to an AD, they will size this up for you, most times thinking about the circumference of your wrist and do you have the right length removed. But one of the most annoying things for me, and I recognize that many of the watches that I tried on or sized on, and maybe a reason I wasn't wearing a watch as much as maybe I would have otherwise, was because of how the bracelet was sized, primarily where the clasp was positioned on the back of my wrist. One of the first things they'll do when you go to a authorized dealer, you get a new watch, they'll size up your bracelet on your wrist, they'll see how many lengths they have to take out, but what isn't talked about enough is that clasp position. For me, I want that perfectly centered on the back of my wrist. Oftentimes, if this is not the case, you'll find a lot of discomfort at the edges of your wrist where the watch doesn't feel even, maybe it's sliding off the wrist. And when you go about your day-to-day, you start to build resentment against the watch that you decide to buy. This is something not enough people consider. One of the tips that I have noticed always is on the 6 o'clock side of the watch, so that bracelet side, you wanna have less links. In the bracelet that I have on right now, I actually have 2 less links on one side of the clasp. That allows me to have a better fit than it would be evenly distributing the perfect amount of links on one side versus the other. This might seem counterintuitive, but to fit that clasp on your wrist, I find this is one of the most beneficial ways of going about it. So look to have less links on the 6 o'clock side. And if you're somebody that has had this issue of trying to fit the clasp perfectly on your wrist, that would be something I'd recommend. And oftentimes, I bet you if you go back through some of your watches and you look at where the clasp is positioned, it probably could be more centered, and I bet it'll be better on your wrist because of it. Now, before we proceed to point two, we have an exciting update on TeddyBaldassar.com. We are now an authorized dealer of Doxa. So Doxa is a brand that is unquestionably an icon in the world of dive watches and lovers of dive watches, being a pioneer back in the mid-20th century for their designs like the Sub 300 and 300T. Further, they have many affiliations with diving legends like Jacques Cousteau, and were crucial in developing many of the common characteristics we now see in dive watches across the industry. Since launching the brand, we now have a collection that was handpicked by myself. I went through all of the different models on the site, picked some of the best that I would strongly recommend. We have modern Sub 300s, 300Ts, the Sub 200, which is just over $1,000 in the entry point for the brand. They also have their 600T in titanium, and their latest release, the 200T, hitting the middle ground of the Sub 300s and the Sub 200s, bringing it into a package that is very wearable on the wrist. Color is obviously another characteristic of the brand, which spans from their well-known professional orange to their versatile shark hunter and black, and a range of others in between. We have an assortment of over 40 different watches to get lost in, so if you are interested in Doxa watches, check it out in the description down below on TeddyBaldassar.com. Now for point two, this is something that I have made a mistake of many times. It is self-explanatory, but it is good to be reminded of this. Be very careful when changing different straps and also sizing bracelets. You can cause some damage to your watch and then also some scratches that could have been completely avoided. Some of the things that I have done is when changing out a strap, spring bars sometimes will have their own way of having a personality and wanting to go one way when you want it to go the other way. Sometimes I've even scratched the front of a lug because in my early days, I was not as controlled with the spring bar tool. Spring bars do have a spring, so they're going to have this tension that is going to make them want to propel out in any direction, so be careful. One thing I do when switching out straps on some more expensive watches, and even watches that I just care about and I don't want to scratch up, maybe they're high polish, putting tape on the back of a lug is going to be your friend here. Also, I'd be careful even with quick release bars. Sometimes just because you think that you don't need to use a spring bar tool, you think that you're in the clear. You don't need to worry about scratching anything. It's very easy to switch it out. You still can have the same issue where when you maybe let go on the spring or that little tab too early, could scratch the back of the lug. So just be careful. And then bracelets, this is a whole nother story. Just mentioning this for screwed in links on bracelets. If you screw up a screw, there is sometimes no way of going back and you really have to get some additional help. That is something you just want to be careful with. I have definitely caused a lot of damage to some screws when I was first sizing a bracelet. Some of them also have things like Loctite on the bracelet, so it's even harder to get it out of that fixed position. But this will make it even more difficult in the future. Sometimes also if you don't screw in the links all the way, then that can also create some issues where the watch might fall off your wrist. Thankfully that's never happened to me, but it can happen. And one other element that I would mention too is going to be pin and collar bracelets. Just be ready for the collar to come out and have an eye for it. It's very small, and if you miss that, you could be creating issues when you try to size the bracelet back up. They never warn you about these things until they happen, so just have a level surface, do it right, be careful, and if you don't feel comfortable, don't feel like you have to do it yourself. You can ask for help, and many authorized dealers and places like this, watchmakers will be able to assist you with this, and just take the time to learn it, do a good job, and don't rush it. Now, the third mistake is thinking Sapphire is going to be indestructible. We put Sapphire on this pedestal as being the superior crystal type compared to things like acrylic and mineral. And in many ways, it is going to be a more modern material that is going to resist scratches better than many other material types for crystals. That said, I don't think we talk about some of the drawbacks of sapphire crystals when it comes to even their resistance to scratches and damage. Sapphire is going to be more scratch resistant than, say, an acrylic crystal, but one of the challenges is if you're ever in proximity to, say, a diamond, which is going to be very, very hard on the Vickers hardness scale, that will still scratch a sapphire crystal. So think about maybe if you have a significant other, you're holding their hand, that could create an issue. Another thing to consider is that sapphire, yes, is going to be more resistant to scratches, but when it comes to drops, shocks, and shattering, that is something that sapphires are not going to be as great at handling. And then we have AR coating. This is a bit of a loaded topic. Now, I personally love AR coating. I will take the bad with the good. The good outweighs the bad in my opinion. But AR coating on the outside of a crystal can show scratches. You can actually have scratches in the coating layer rather than the actual crystal itself, and that might drive some people absolutely mad. To me, I am someone that embraces the scratches, but the mistake thinking that crystals like sapphire can handle anything you throw at them is a mistake and can oftentimes lead to some unnecessary pain of maybe not reaching the expectation that you had for them. And I'm gonna give some love to acrylic crystals. Again, I don't think enough people appreciate acrylic crystals. They just hear that, oh, it's plexiglass. That's not something that I want on my watch, but there's a lot of upside with them. They do not smudge as easily. They also are not going to shatter as easily. And yes, they can be scratched more easily than a sapphire crystal can be, but you also have the ability to buff out those scratches as long as it's not so deep into the crystal. Now the next point, or the next mistake here, is going to be bad practice when dealing with screw down crowns. The first point obvious to bring up is just not screwing in the damn thing when you're going about your day-to-day, or maybe even worse, jumping into the water. Please do not make this mistake. I think this is self-explanatory. Many crowns will also have like a warning sign, maybe some color to show that the crown is not screwed in. Do not be this person. And also keep in mind that just because your watch is 200 meters of water resistance, when the crown is unscrewed, you could just throw all of that out the window. A watch that might have 30 to 50 meters of water resistance is going to be more water resistant than a watch that is not going to be sealed with that screw down crown. A crown pressed into the case is going to be better than a crown pulled out, regardless of what the water resistance rating is. So please keep this in mind. Pretty self-explanatory. The other thing that I'll mention though too, and this is something I've actually made a mistake with in my collecting journey, is not thinking about the threading on a screw down crown. Screw down crowns, given a lot of appreciation among collectors, I think many people rightfully say that a screw down crown gives you more confidence with water resistance, which is true. I do think it's slightly overblown. If a watch is able to be tested at 100 meters and is a push-pull crown, great. I'm not losing sleep over that. But screw down crowns, yes, it's going to be a tighter seal, give you some more confidence. But one thing that is overlooked is the threading on these crowns when you're screwing them back in. I find that many people get a bit careless, and this was even myself when I was first getting into watches, a little bit careless when screwing the crown back in. This is where this cross-threading can happen on these crowns, where at one point, if you are not careful, if time and time again wearing into these thread, this will prevent the crown from being able to be screwed back in. basically giving you a watch that needs to be sent in for service, and you have this whole situation. So this is one of the downsides of screw down crowns. It's actually pretty delicate threading that you have on the crown itself. So don't be like this. Be careful when you're screwing in your crown. Make sure it's set in position and then screw the crown in. Mistake number 5. This is one I've also been guilty of doing. Bad habits with the crown and then winding or over-winding a watch. So what I'm looking at here is maybe winding the watch or setting the time when the watch is on your wrist. That's a big no-no, do not do that. And the other point is just not being careful when winding a watch and when you feel that resistance to stop so you don't overwind it. I have done both of these at once while shooting a video in the past. I remember I was shooting a video and I had a vintage IWC caliber 89 on my wrist. It was a nice, beautiful dress watch, and I was just fidgeting. I was playing with the crown while I was talking. I had my hands out of frame, maybe down here, and I was playing with the crown while it was on my wrist. I was doing 2 things that you should not do, and what did I do? I overwound the manual wound watch and went past that point of no return. So I had to send the watch back in and then reconstruct the crown. So please do not do this. This is what you're feeling on the inside. You have a barrel, then you have the mainspring on the inside. As you're winding, that will be coiled up completely, and it's not going to be able to slip inside that barrel any longer. So this could cause damage to the movement on the inside if you overwind. What many automatic watches will have and why they can't be overwound is because they have a slipping bridle. This will allow this to slip inside the barrel, so allow you to keep winding without damaging any of the gears, springs, or the crown system and any of the works correlated with the crown. And again, just be careful whenever setting a watch, setting the time, manual winding a watch. Just take it off your wrist before doing it. It's the best thing to do. You have this very delicate crown stem that you're talking about here, so any change in the angle in which you're pulling or adding this pressure can throw everything off. The sliding pinion that can then engage and allow the keyless and motion works to allow you to set the time could also be thrown off. Just don't mess around with this. It's just best, just take it off your wrist. Don't do this. I have made this mistake. I am not above it. And just something you just want to be careful of. I know this is self-explanatory stuff usually, but it doesn't mean that we're not pervious to making these mistakes. Point number 6, this is one I've also talked about on the channel, but I want to go into even more detail here, changing the date and day at the wrong time. I have talked about this several times on the channel. What you're getting here, and it's not even a matter of inexpensive watch versus luxury watch. Many watches just have different ways of having this change in the day and the date. What you'll find with many watches is that they're not going to have this instantaneous change at 12 o'clock or midnight, where it's going to move to the next day right away. It's more going to be this gradual shift into the next day. So I always say avoid changing the day or the date or any really complication in general from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. I find this is better safe than sorry. I see some people saying 9 p.m. to 3 a.m., which probably is okay, but every caliber is different on when they're going to make this change. So I think it's better to extend this out. What I always do before I change anything is actually pull the crown to the farthest position and advance the time all the way until I can see whether or not I'm in AM or PM, and then I will make these changes once I'm outside of these windows of time where you shouldn't be doing this. That gives me full confidence to know that I'm not looking at PM instead of AM, so I can make this happen. Number 7 is going to be engaging pushers in water, underwater, while submerged. I think this is something to be avoided. There are some brands that have developed technologies that will allow pushers to be engaged underwater. My personal feeling on this, I think it's just best to not do it at all. Chronographs in water, to me, not the best combination, and I don't think it's worth it. You do have screw down pushers that you can get, and if that's the case, absolutely okay. If you have it screwed down, just refer back to the point earlier about the crown and making sure it's screwed down. Same thing will apply here with pushers. Why I am not a fan of pushers in water and why I don't think it's worth it even to wear a chronograph, even if it's tested for 100 meters of water resistance in water, is the sealing around pushers are not going to be as strong as you're going to find elsewhere with almost the suction that is created when you press one of those down. Now, some might be saying, but I never use my chronograph in water, why should I do that? All it takes, say you're swimming in a pool, maybe doing laps with a chronograph on your wrist, if it just knocks the sidewall of a pool, that could create the issue to have water get in the case, then you have an expensive service. Just not worth it to me. I would rather just either have screw down pushers or just not wear my watch at all, or maybe just get a different style of watch and wear that in the pool with me. And then for the final point is just be cognizant of magnets around you when wearing your watches. Magnets are not the friends of watches. They don't necessarily get along. Now, you are seeing the adoption of other materials like silicon, which are going to have great resistance to magnetic fields. You also have the master chronometer certification from a brand like Omega, which is going to be resistant to 15,000 Gauss. Why they developed that rating of 15,000 Gauss, that number was developed because of the magnetic fields that were produced by an MRI machine. What they looked at was all of the typical types of watch buyers. They looked at the public, what percentage of the public, at least a decent percentage of public, would be exposed, what's the natural exposure that they would have to magnetic fields. And the MRI machine was exactly the reason, and that has that output similar to that. So that was why that number was determined. There is enough watch buyers that had proximity to these MRI machines, and that is the magnetic output of those machines, so the watches needed to be withstand that. So that is where they established that benchmark and work backwards from there. One thing that's not talked about enough is just magnets are basically everywhere, and they're not the friends of an oscillating balance wheel and the balance spring that can really be thrown off when something is magnetized. Now, there are things like degaussers that you can look into and that are great tools to have in your watchmaking kit. And even if you're not a watchmaker, just have one handy, because if you ever have a watch that's magnetized, this is an easy way to correct the problem without having a bigger ordeal take place. So far in this video, I've been talking about all these bad things are going to be happening to your watches. Don't worry too much. You don't have to be paranoid looking around corners thinking that magnets are going to come and get you in your watches. Just be alert to what is out there and be careful as well that magnets are not the friend of mechanical watches. But all right, guys, that is my video here looking at 8 day-to-day mistakes that watch collectors might be making with their watches. And those watch collectors, including me, because I've made many of these mistakes in the past. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell icon. Really do appreciate that. Also, have you made a mistake like one of the ones mentioned here in the past with your collecting journey? Leave a comment down below and tell us a little bit more about it. Also check out TeddyBaldestar.com, full authorized dealer of 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer, including now Doxa just being added to the site. Definitely check out the new collection. Also, if you are in the market for a watch, we know that you can buy a watch in a lot of different places nowadays, but we'd absolutely love to have your business. Allow us to keep doing what we're doing here, and we love what we do. Guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.